welcome to Series 10, Episode 8 of In Suspense, a podcast and vodcast for fans and writers of crime fiction. I'm Nikki Smith, and today is our final episode of this series of In Suspense. So we have a full house of presenters. I'm here with both my lovely co-hosts, Leslie Cara and Lauren North. Hello, guys.
Hi.
So in our last episode, Eleni Kyriakou and Emma Flint talked about reflecting true crimes in fiction and whether you should make a murderer likable. It was a really fascinating discussion, so do check that one out. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking to the fabulous Vaseem Khan about his latest novel and our topic for today, which is modernising the crime community. So I think that's going to be pretty interesting. But before we go on, we've got some rather sad news for In Suspense. So I'm going to hand you over to Lauren North, who's going to tell you all about it.
Thank you, Nikki. Yes, the sad news is that I have made the very difficult decision that I'm going to be leaving as one of the co-hosts of In Suspense. I'm very sad. I've had an amazing 3 years with you both, and I'm definitely going to miss you. I know we'll be friends for life, so that's one thing I won't miss. I won't lose that. But obviously my writing schedule has increased quite a lot over the last year, and I now need to spend a bit more time actually fulfilling my contracts and writing. So I am sad to be leaving, but I will be listening. I'll be an avid listener instead, and I'm always here if you need me for anything, guys. So I just wanted to say as well, thank you very much to all the listeners for your support over the last couple of years.
Yes, we are terribly sad to be losing Lauren. We really are. And, because Lauren and I, we started this sort of together, didn't we, back in 2020. And it's unbelievable that we're already on our 10th series. This is the end of the series 10. And I don't think either of us imagined that we'd be doing it now, did we? We didn't think that it would carry on this long. And we've interviewed such amazing authors and tackled some brilliant topics. And, without you, Lauren, it wouldn't have gone ahead because, you've done all the editing and the uploading of all the episodes, and you're so organised in keeping us on track. And of course, Nikki's joined us, I can't even remember when you joined us. It seems like you've been here forever, Nikki, But you keep all three of us, yourselves including, you keep all three of us in track, and so Nikki and I've really got to step up, I think. But yeah, we'd like to say a huge thank you to all your hard work. I'm rambling here because I'm a little bit sad. Obviously, we've known about this for a while because we've discussed it, and I want to reassure listeners it's not about artistic differences,
No, and also it's not the end of In Suspense either, is it, guys? That's a really positive thing. No. You're cracking on without me, which is brilliant.
Absolutely, yeah. But and as you said, we'll be catching up with you regularly. You might even get invited on as a guest. You never know, Lauren, if you play your cards right.
God, I think everyone's sick of hearing about me.
Oh, dear.
Yes, we're going to miss you hugely, Lauren, and I've absolutely loved working with you this past year, but totally understand why you need to step away, as I know how busy your life is at the moment. But listeners will be pleased to hear that Leslie and I will be back with a new series of In Suspense after a little bit of an extended Christmas break. Series 11 we're going to start, I think, at the beginning of February, and we've already got some absolutely amazing guests lined up for you to listen to.
Oh, and just another thing I wanted to say, Lauren, I wanted to wish you all the best with all your books and everything, because you're going to be so busy next year, and we're just so excited to see what happens with you next year with all your wonderful books. And I've loved reading Clickbait, absolutely loved it.
Oh, thanks.
You have as well, Nikki, and some marvellous reviews are coming in, so I hope everybody gets pre-ordering that one, and we wish
you very much. You're wonderful. Thank you. I will miss you both lots. But back to today's episode. How about we get Vaseem Khan on to talk to us about his amazing book and ask him all about his role as the new chair of the Crime Writers Association and modernising the crime community.
Let's do that.
Hi, Vaseem Khan. Welcome to In Suspense. We are delighted to have you with us today. It's a great honour for us to be interviewing you. And we wondered if you could perhaps introduce yourself to our listeners and our viewers. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And we always say It is no time for modesty, so you need to big up your amazing achievements, and if you don't, we will.
Well, you may well regret saying that. First of all, thank you for inviting me on. Right, what can I tell you about myself? So, well, I spent 23 years trying to get published, so that's probably the first point to make. I wrote my first novel age 17. It was a comic fantasy because I was reading Terry Pratchett's wonderful Discworld series. I finished it, I sent it in, and then I told my parents I'm not going to university because I'm going to be a rich and famous writer. And you can imagine exactly what Asian parents thought of that particular plan. Anyway, the book was crap, so it didn't go anywhere. But at least I finished it. I knew what I wanted to do. Spent another 20 years writing books, 7 of them, sending them in, blanket bombing agents all around the country, not getting anywhere. And then I was published about 10 years ago. So now I can say that I write 2 crime series, both set in India because I lived in India, but we can talk about that a bit later. Although I was born and grew up in the UK. And the first series is called the Baby Ganesh Agency novels, beginning with the unexpected inheritance of Inspector Chopra, about a middle-aged policeman who retires from the police service in his mid-40s, has to solve various murders, but also inherits a baby elephant. And, again, we can get into that a bit later on. And the current series that I write is a historical crime series set in India in the 1950s, just following Indian independence and featuring India's first female police detective. And those are called the Malabar House novels, beginning with Midnight at Malabar House. And the books have won various awards. They've been published in many languages around the world, and they have effectively given me a career that I never expected to have after all of those years of being punched in the proverbials by various agents and around the country. So if you ask me not to be modest, what I will say is that aside from all of those achievements, I am also known as the best amateur cricketer in the country. Okay, that's a lie. I just made that up, but I wish.
And your latest book, Death of a Lesser God, published on the 10th of August in hardback, didn't it? And e-back. And it comes out, I believe, in March next year in paperback, doesn't it? It's a brilliant read, Vaz. So would you like to tell our listeners a little more about the book, please?
Well, that's very nice of you to say so. Okay, so Death of a Lesser God is the 4th in the Malabar House series. And so a little bit of background for people. So the Malabar House series is set in 1950, just after Indian independence in 1947. India is a very turbulent country. It's shadowed by the horrors of partition, Gandhi's assassination, and of course, 300 years of the British presence on the subcontinent. And now India has taken the reins again, and it's trying to figure out what kind of country India is going to be. And into this mix, I put India's first female police detective, Persis, who qualifies. Nobody knows what to do with her. And so they shove her in into Bombay's smallest police station called Malabar House, and with a whole bunch of other rejects and misfits that nobody wants to work with. And that happens in the first book, Midnight at Malabar House, and she's paired with an Englishman named Archie Blackfinch, who we'll talk about later, and the pair of them have to solve various murders that occur throughout the series. Now, what Death of a Lesser God does is it slightly inverts the narrative, and what it does is we have an Englishman who was born and raised in India, James Whitby, who is accused and convicted of murdering an Indian nationalist lawyer, and who has 11 days left before he's hanged. And a new investigation is forced through at the last second by his father, and Persis and Archie have to investigate. And they start in Bombay and they end up in Calcutta. And the question that this book asks us is, can post-colonial societies deal justly with their former colonizers? And I guess the reason that I wrote this book is because even today we are struggling and grappling with these questions, because we hear about statues being torn down and new discussions around colonial legacies and how those have impacted various countries around the world. And what I think of when I think about these kind of topics is that history always belongs to the winners. And so we have lots and lots of information about India during and just after the Raj written by middle-aged white men, and nothing wrong with that. They're entitled to write write history and books as well. And plenty of the research that I do comes from those sources. But there isn't so much information that's told from the Indian perspective of what it was like to live through the Raj and the end of the Raj in particular, and then the establishing of what was technically a new country, but was also tied to this incredibly ancient land. India as a culture is thousands and thousands of years old, but the British presence in India made such a massive difference, and it completely changed the trajectory of the subcontinent. And so those are the kind of issues that I'm exploring in Death of a Lesser God, and I'm doing it by using this inverted setup where a white man is actually claiming that he is the victim of a form of reverse racism. So he says that he didn't murder this Indian lawyer, that he's just being he's being punished for the sins of his fathers. And so that's what Death of a Lesser God tries to do. It tries to lead us through that particular maze.
Thank you.
Well, I've just finished reading it, Vaz, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I loved it, and I'm going to have to go back and now work my way through the rest of the series, actually.
You know what? You guys should be on my sales team, honestly.
No, I really did. I think it's got everything. I don't think it was what I expected it, actually. I thought it would be quite a lot more kind of historical kind of, and whether it was going to be quite a kind of difficult read, but it's not. It's got an absolutely fantastic plot, brilliant characters, and there's even a tiger, so there's absolutely something for everybody in it. And
you're making me blush now, lady, and you can't tell because I'm brown, but honestly.
No, I really enjoyed it. And as you said, one of the kind of main protagonists in the book, Inspector Persis Wadia, she's a strong, independent female, which I didn't also expect to find in a book set in India in 1950. So what made you decide to kind of write her as your, I guess, main protagonist in the series?
Well, she actually started as a man and then underwent this gender change, and we're not going to get into any of those discussions, but
no, let's not.
No, but I mean, it's obvious that I'm not a woman. So I did initially think, I'm going to create a character set in 1950s India, and he's going to be a man. But then I thought, actually, it would be far more interesting to set a woman into this period, because India in 1950 is an incredibly patriarchal society, and institutions like the police force are incredibly misogynistic. And to give you a simple example, when I was doing the research for this period, I came across an advert which was aimed at young Indian women. And the advert was, train her to be the ideal daughter-in-law. And it had this young Indian woman with an older Indian woman and a sewing machine. And it was an ad for sewing machines in India. But the messaging was that the ideal young Indian woman, her entire aspirations should be to learn how to use the sewing machine so she can be a good wife. And I thought this was not only incredibly offensive, but maybe par for the course for that period. But I thought this cannot be the only story about women in this period. And when you begin to research, you come up with these amazing stories of women who did amazing things in the independence movement. To give you a simple example, there was a woman called Saraswati Rajamani. And at the age of 16, she was living out in Bengal, where Calcutta is the capital. And she came across a freedom fighter called Bose, and she was taken away because Bose was the anti-Gandhi. So whereas Gandhi was saying peace and use peace to get rid of the British, Bose was saying, no, let's get out there and fight. Let's give the British a black eye and force them out of the country. And Gandhi came to her house, and she wasn't sold as a 15-year-old on his message. She was far more sold on Bose's message. And so she ended up joining Bose as part of his women's wing of his revolutionary movement. They got a lovely uniform, they got military training, and then they were put into the field. And at the age of 17, she was sent into a British camp in Rangoon as a spy. And she ended up doing all sorts of amazing things, rescuing prisoners, being shot, hiding in a tree for 3 days to avoid the British as they tried to track her down. And then she was forgotten about by history for a long period of time. But when I came across these kinds of people, I thought, do you know what? There's so many amazing stories of women. And so they all were distilled, went into the character of Inspector Persis Wadia, who qualifies. And as I said, She's nobody wants to work with her because she's the first female on the Indian police force, and she's not perfect. She's got these. She's very much so determined to prove that she's as good as her male counterparts that she does sometimes break the rules and ride roughshod over people's sensibilities. My personal opinion is, so bloody what? Who cares? In crime fiction, as all of you will know, we are more than happy to have male mavericks who never toe the line and go around the rules, and everybody loves them and applauds them. So why shouldn't we give women the same leeway?
Bravo, Vaz.
Yes.
I think that's brilliant. Yeah, fantastic.
That really is so great, and I think it just added a whole other layer as well, having that sexism as well. So it was fantastic. It's a really brilliant series as well. So I will add my piece to that. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about James Whitby. You've spoken about this sort of reverse racism, which played out really well in the story. But he as well is just not actually that much of a sympathetic character. It was quite hard to sort of root for him and at places in the novel. So I just wonder if you could talk a bit more about him and how his character came about.
Yeah, I have to say that I do kill a lot of white people in these books. But I think that's fair enough for 300 years of colonialism. Look, I think we have to be very, very fair to all parties. And I think one of the problems with historical narratives written by, as I said, lots of white commentators, and then the opposite, narratives written by Indians, is that they're unable to step away and look at the bigger picture and try to be balanced. Now, because I was born and grew up in the UK, I went to India at the age of 23 and ended up spending 10 years there. And of course, my heritage is from the subcontinent. It means that I can be slightly more balanced. And I often say that not every Brit who went to India was a sinner, but not every Indian was a saint either. And what I mean by that is that many Brits who went to India weren't Clive of India. They weren't there to loot and pillage. They were there because they were told that this is a great way for you to have a career. And many who ended up staying on after Indian independence, they stayed on because, like James Whitby, they'd been born there. It was their country. They knew no other life. They couldn't bear the thought of coming back to cold, wet, miserable England without servants, etc., etc. But that didn't mean that they were saints, because they grew up with privilege. And James Whitby grew up with a father who was one of these colonial industrialists who made a fortune. And so I think we have to understand that when you write books like this, it's far better to have people who are real and nuanced and who reflect the real world, that they reflect reality. All of us, every single one of us, no matter how saintly we believe ourselves to be, given the right circumstances, given our environments, given how we grew up and the things that we imbibe, have prejudices. We have unconscious biases. We make mistakes, and we can't help that. And you only have to look at what's going on in the world at the moment, in various parts of the world, to see how history and hatred have intertwined to make even normal people behave in ways that we would normally find quite abhorrent. But they are justified, or they justify it to themselves because of these historical narratives and I think that's what's happening here. What I will say is this, that the British during their time in India created a justice system that favored the British, and because they were the rulers. And so as a Brit, you could get away with all sorts of crimes. And throughout the 300 years that the Brits were in India, I think there were only 1 or 2 Brits that were ever taken to trial for murdering Indians. And yet hundreds of thousands of Indians were murdered. And in fact, it became such an epidemic of Brits killing their own servants that it became known as the Stout British Boot. And it was encapsulated in a poem by Punch magazine. And what it meant was that so many servants kicked so many British Brits kicked their servants to death in India. And it's because Indians suffered greatly from malaria, which enlarges your spleen. And if you have an enlarged spleen and someone kicks you there, it bursts and it kills you. And it became such a widespread thing. So I think the idea of having someone like a James Whitby taken to task for murdering an Indian was, in a sense, Indians trying to get their own back for all of this great period of injustice that they saw.
Yeah, that's a
So
great level,
fascinating.
a great level of authenticity in your novel. And I could listen to you all day because you're so eloquent and interesting. Which brings me on to my next question. Really, I mean, you just have an incredible ability, I think, to transport us to 1950s Calcutta as well as other locations in India. And you manage, as you've just done, really, to tell the reader and the listener about the culture and history without it ever feeling like a lecture. It's more like anecdotes and stories. And I've heard you talk many a time, and you have that amazing connection with an audience, which is fabulous. But you always manage, I think, to keep the story at the forefront of the novel, rather than being didactic or giving us loads of sort of lecture type things. And you make this appear effortless. And I know it isn't. That kind of writing is never effortless. So I was wondering about the level of research you do. I mean, obviously you're incredibly well versed in the history of India anyway, but how much research do you actually do when you set about writing one of your novels? Or do you just draw on what you've already gathered?
I'm going to correct you. It's completely effortless. Yeah, I just wake up in the morning and I've got it all done and dusted, by
Oh,
breakfast.
stop it! We hate
We
you.
don't believe you.
No,
Lucky you, Vaz. Lucky you.
no, I'm joking. I'm joking. It's a horrendously horrendous effort, and the biggest effort, of course, is, as all of you know, what to leave out, and so that it doesn't become bogged down in me showing off or trying to impress everybody with my knowledge. I think that the lesson that I always come back to when I write these books is, especially during the editing phase when I take stuff out, is every single thing in this book moving the story forward in some way? Are we developing the characters or exploring a setting or moving the action forward? And if it's not, then it means it's too much that doesn't need to be there. And the other lesson I always say is putting myself in the shoes of a reader. I always think that it's so much nicer to learn about the world when you're also being entertained. If it's just learning, well, that's what textbooks are for. But when we're writing fiction, especially crime fiction, I think, which is a wonderful way to put a lens on the world and have a look at whether it's a modern world or whether it's historical, it's a wonderful way to look at, how society was set up, what was going on, how people were behaving. And if you can do that right, I think what it does is it takes people along on that journey so that they're enjoying what the book is supposed to be, which is, I hope, riveting murder mysteries. But at the same time, slowly we're sneaking in the flavor of the period and the time and what's going on. And often you find that research shapes the kind of book that you're trying to write. So with Death of a Lesser God, right? So it starts off in Bombay, which I explore in the first three Malabar House novels. But then I wanted to take a look at Calcutta. So I take Archie and Persis over to Calcutta. And Calcutta is incredibly fascinating. It was one of these sort of village places that the British bought up, which was largely tigers going around snacking on locals and the odd Brit, and then they turned it into this enormous city, which became the administrative center of the British Empire. But when you ask people in the West about Calcutta, the only thing that comes to mind for them is the black hole of Calcutta, which I can tell you another story about that, which about how history is often distorted. But for that period of time that I'm looking at, it was still an incredibly important part of the British Empire in India. And I came across a particular story that I didn't know about, never heard of it. And that was that the Americans sent 150,000 odd or 200,000 troops to be stationed in Bengal to try and prevent the Chinese from coming in through Burma during World War II. And 20,000 of those troops were African-American soldiers. Mm-hmm. And Indians had never seen black people before, African-Americans before. And what happened was that the African-Americans, because they were segregated from the white American soldiers, they had their own barracks, etc., they actually decided to go out into the streets of Calcutta. And they interacted with the locals, whereas the white soldiers tended to keep to themselves. And because of that, you have this enormous body of material and photographs and anecdotes that of how that relationship developed over the few years that they were there. And because I came across that, I decided that there would be a second case in Death of a Lesser God of a murdered African-American soldier at the end of the war. And then Persis and Archie have to work out whether there's a link between them or not.
Fantastic.
Fascinating. Really fascinating. But we should probably move on to our topic for today as well, which is modernising the crime community. So you are the first non-white chair of the CWA, which I think many of our listeners will know already is the Crime Writers Association. And I think it's fair to say that alongside all the amazing things that the CWA does, it does have a bit of a reputation as being seen as a little bit outdated. So would you say that's true or fair? And what kinds of things do you hope to do to change the organisation?
Okay, so I think the first thing for me to say is that, yes, it's an absolutely a great honor to be elected chair. I mean, it's a 70-year-old organization, the largest and oldest organization of crime writers in the UK, and to follow in the footsteps of the likes of Ian Rankin and Peter James, who've chaired the organization before, is it's incredibly humbling, but also a great responsibility. And you're absolutely fair to say that many people have, over the last couple of decades, had the impression that the CWA had stalled, in the sense that perhaps it wasn't following the current trends and wasn't perhaps orienting itself to the changes that we saw in the publishing industry. I personally think that over the last 5 years, that probably would be a slightly unfair criticism, because the CWA, prior to me becoming chair, had brought in certain innovations. For example, taking on board self-published writers, which for a very, very long time was opposed by not just the CWA, but many writing membership organizations. And I always thought that was very short-sighted, because there's lots of brilliant self-published writing out there. Like any form of writing, there's good stuff, there's bad stuff. But I think if writers prove themselves, and because we have this democratization of the industry, it just makes no sense. It began to make absolutely no sense whatsoever to exclude self-published writers. So I think those were changes that were already in place, and when I was on the board, but not the chair. What is the CWA for? I think that's the question that we hark back to. And if you ask 10 different people who are members and non-members, they'll have 10 different opinions. So I can only give you what my opinion is. And my opinion is that the crime fiction has never been more popular, not just in the UK, but around the world. It's by far the most popular selling genre in the publishing industry. And that means that it has heft, it has weight across the publishing industry. And when you have a large body of people who are invested in the genre, you need a body that speaks for that genre, or tries to speak for that genre. Of course, it will never speak for everybody, especially not the skeptics, the CWA skeptics, but we have to make a strong fist of trying to represent the genre. So to give you a simple example, last week I was at the House of Commons attending an all-party committee meeting of writers and people involved in the industry, who were there to talk to the MP who's responsible for basically pushing the concerns of writers. And we talked about those concerns, and the MP said the kind of things that were happening. So artificial intelligence and how that might be a threat to writers, the general threat of very low incomes for writers because they're not being paid properly by the industry. So all of these kind of things, you need bodies to try and push those agendas with people who might be able to do something. And we will never succeed all the time. And the kind of things that I want to help is not just in those areas, but also, as we've talked about, to modernize the CWA so that, one, it better reflects the people who are writing crime fiction, not just in the UK, but around the world. And I think, let's be honest, my appointment sends a strong signal. 10 years ago, it would have been unthinkable for a non-white writer, mainly not because of racism, but because there weren't any, or there was maybe one or two that were out there, but hardly any with any traction. So it's a strong signal, but the board itself has brought on a few more people of color, but we need to do more than that. It's not just about color. We need to make sure that the industry is properly represented, not just by writers, but within the structure of the industry. So editors, agents, commissioning agents, marketing and publicity people, We need to have a proper diversity in terms of male female. Too many of the key positions are still controlled by men. We need more women in those key positions, the gatekeepers. People of pardon me if I'm using the wrong terminology, but disabled people from disabled backgrounds, working class writers. So my aim over the next couple of years is to try and push that message. I can't control the industry, of course. I can't make it happen, but I can certainly keep pushing that message. And then it's about the kind of fiction that the CWA represents. And I think one of those things might be covered in your next question, actually.
Yes, it is. And that is talking about the Crime Writers Association. There are so many subgenres of crime now, including psychological thrillers, domestic noir, destination thrillers. So do you see these genres falling under the CWA? And what does the organisation offer to authors in these genres?
Yes. Okay. So I won a dagger. I won a dagger, a historical dagger for Midnight at Malabar House years ago. And even then, it was obvious to me that there were gaps in the kind of crime fiction that the CWA seemed to represent. There were such glaring gaps. So there was no dagger specifically for psychological thrillers, for instance, right? And given that Gone Girl came out, 15, 20 years ago now? I mean, it seemed ludicrous to me that we could have a historical crime fiction dagger. Yeah, and I'm saying this as a winner, and it really helped my career. But it still felt to me something was wrong here, because psychological thrillers outsell nearly every other genre, don't they, in crime fiction? So it seemed ludicrous to me that wasn't there. So I was pitching for it for ages, and when I became chair, that was the first thing I announced on the day that on the dagger ceremony where I was given the chairship. The first thing I announced was that I wanted to bring in 2 new daggers, one for psychological and suspense thrillers, which includes domestic noir, but the other for the thing that over in the recent years has sort of taken the industry by storm, and that is badged as cozy crime. I'm not a huge fan of that term, but let's use it. And the only reason I'm not a fan of that term is because my first series, the Baby Ganesh Agency novels, they were called cozy crime, and I never liked the term then, because you have cozy crime in America, which can be super, 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 super cozy, which is fine. There's a market for that. But the kind of cozy crime we're talking about is where, my definition of it is where the blood and the swearing and the gore and the sex is all off stage, but the writing itself has weight, it has heft, it tells you something about society. It might have a note of humor running through it, but it's still serious crime fiction. And that's obviously Richard Osman's been at the forefront of that resurgence. I mean, I use the word resurgence, but personally, I don't think it ever went away, because the dagger that I introduced covers not just this notion of this modern cozy crime, but also traditional crime and golden age crime fiction, which has never gone away from being popular ever since the heyday of golden age crime fiction in the 20s and 30s. Mm-hmm. So I think those 2 things, they will be first awarded in 2025, but they will open for submissions in 2024. I think they will send a strong signal to the industry that the CWA really wants to embrace what's happening in the industry in terms of what's selling and what readers are really liking to read.
Oh, that's excellent news.
Impressive.
Really, really excellent news. And well done for...
I should say, we're not promising to make anybody an overnight bestseller, but we're hoping that the CWA now becomes more representative of not just diversity, but of the kind of stuff that people love to read in crime fiction.
Absolutely. Now, we often hear, Vaz, that the publishing industry is grappling with issues such as cultural appropriation and diversity. And I know you yourself have written a PDF guide, haven't you, and recorded some really excellent videos talking about this very subject and your views on it. And people can access that, can't they, via your website. What would you say are the key things that authors need to consider when tackling these issues, when writing, in a voice that isn't one that they have direct personal experience with?
Well, I mean, you guys have known me for a long time, I think, and you know that I'm not the kind of person to get on his soapbox and point fingers and shout at people. I think what's the old saying? You catch more flies with sugar than, well, I can't remember the rest of the saying. You know what I mean?
I think we know what you mean.
Yeah.
I don't like to go around punching people in the face and saying, "Oh, you're a massive racist, and you're not letting us in the industry," and etc. etc. I think my experience since the day that I've been published has been enormously positive. I've had the same agent, I've had the same publishers, and everyone that I've spoken to has been enormously helpful, not just to me, but to wanting to listen about how the industry could be better. And I honestly believe that the vast majority of the industry, the only reason that diversity has been an issue is less to do with racism and far more to do with the industry being risk averse. Mm-hmm. So because historically the books that have been successful have been written by white writers with white characters, the industry has always been afraid that, if we change that, we'll scare readers off and we won't make any money. And I think it's taken a long time to change that perception. And it's required a few people to be successful and to show them that readers won't be scared senseless by seeing Vaseem Khan's weird name on the cover, and that kind of thing. So that, I think, in that sense, I think the crime fiction in particular has been leading the charge. Now, as far as cultural appropriation is concerned, my personal belief is this: every writer should have the right to write whatever they want. Because if you don't have that rule, what you're really saying is that the only people any of us can write about are people who are identical to ourselves. So I could only ever write about middle-aged Asian men born in Britain. And that would be an incredibly boring story, because my life is incredibly boring. But anyway, it would be incredibly. So I couldn't even write a female character if we're going to take cultural appropriation seriously. And I certainly couldn't have any white characters in my books because I'm not white. So I think I disagree with that whole notion that we should ban writers from writing particular characters. What we do need to understand is that the world has changed. People's sensibilities have changed, readers' sensibilities and the industry sensibilities have changed. The people who publish these books, and they need to be very careful that they won't get criticized. I hate using that word cancelled, because, to be honest, do people really get cancelled? Some people seem to do, but Mel Gibson seems to be doing all right. After numerous scandals. So I'm not sure if people do really get cancelled once they're beyond a certain critical mass of fame. But for me, that project came about because there was this whole discussion going around the industry: who has the right to write what does authenticity mean? And yes, you're right, I cover all of those things. I did it at the behest of my publishers, who are one of the big five, and we worked with the Arts Council to try and make this material so that it was freely available to everybody. You can just go on my website, vaseemkhan.com, if you want to know about this kind of thing, and to distill the answers through all of this material. It's actually not rocket science. It's actually not rocket science. If you want to write a character that's not from your own background, that's fine. But there are certain things that you can do. So, for instance, avoid stereotypes. One of the things that really bugs me is that virtually every depiction of a British middle-aged Asian male over the last sort of 15, 20 years on TV has been of either a terrorist, a domestic abuser, or a father who kills his daughter in an honor killing. And you know what? Those are stories that need to be told. Nothing wrong with that. But but because there was nothing else that was being published or put on screen, you'd assume that that's the only thing middle-aged British Asian men did. So I think, be careful using stereotypes. Doing your research, that's a no-brainer, but you'd be amazed how many people get simple things like, I came across a book the other day which had a Muslim character with a half Hindu name and a half Muslim name. And clearly the author had just plucked a couple of their Asian mates and said, I'll just join your names together. I mean,
That's just lazy, isn't it? That's just lazy. Yeah.
That's where a lot of these problems come up. Sheer laziness of not researching that community you're writing about properly. And I think the last thing I might say is, it's a very slippery word, and it's empathy. Empathy does not mean that you have to portray a community in a perfect light. Absolutely not. You can have black drug dealers. You can have Asian criminals. You can have white people doing awful things. If I'm an Asian writer, you can have all of those things. Characters don't have to be good. Empathy simply means trying your best to get into the shoes of that community through your research, through understanding what might drive or motivate these characters that you've created, and not having one-dimensional cardboard cutouts that you might have just seen on an episode of Harry Enfield, for instance. So I think those are the three key lessons, I think.
Yeah, and there's also, I get really cross when people sort of criticise the rise in sensitivity readers, and they seem to think that sensitivity readers are crushing people's creative freedom, whereas I think the opposite. I think they're actually they're helping you to enhance your authenticity. That's my view anyway, having used a sensitivity reader. I mean, I don't know what your views on that are.
I think the topic of sensitivity readers has itself become sensitive now.
Yeah.
So you need sensitivity gurus to look at the sensitivity readers now. Look, there's lots of different opinions on this. Some writers absolutely hate the idea of being micromanaged by a sensitivity reader. Other writers I know think they're brilliant. So to give you a simple example, Will Dean, who writes brilliant books set in Sweden, but he also wrote a book featuring a Vietnamese female character. And Will, as we know, is not a female Vietnamese person. The book was called The Last Thing to Burn, and it was a huge success. And
we've all read it.
I think it's his best book. It's brilliant.
So he's published by we share the same editor. And I asked Will and my editor when I was doing this project, what was the thought process that you went through? And Will said, look, I was absolutely concerned. And I had a sort of team of sort of Vietnamese people that I went to try and read bits of it and give me advice on things. So he had those kind of sensitivity readers. And when it was purchased by the publisher, they did their own due diligence. And in the end, because everything was done well, there was no feedback. There was no one came up and said, what the hell gives you, strapping Will to write this book about from the perspective of a young female Vietnamese lady. No, people just enjoyed it for what it was, which was a good thriller that made strong points about, well, I won't give the plot away, but it made strong points.
Yes, it was great. We have all read it, so yes. And what's next for you, Vaz? Are you going to write another book in the Malabar House series? Can you tell us anything about what you're going to do next?
Yes, what I'm going to do next is climb to the top of a tall building and throw myself off it, because I'm busy doing final edits to things, and I'm sure you've been through the editing process, and yes, like that. Look, I have, I'm under contract for a few more books with my publisher. The next Malabar House novel actually won't come out till 2025. It's tentatively called City of Destruction. And it starts with a bang, literally, because there's an assassination attempt in Bombay. A young man is killed trying to assassinate a senior politician, and then Persis has to work out who he is, what he was doing, and it ends up taking her to Kashmir, which those who know anything about India will know that Kashmir has been a disputed territory between India and Pakistan for the last 75 years. So that book will allow me to examine that particular festering sore. But my next year's release is actually not a Malabar House novel. It's a small town America thriller called Eden Falls. It's a fictional name I gave to this wooded mining town. And it's got unreliable narrators. It's about a young woman who is convicted of murdering the golden son of this mining dynasty, this incredibly famous and wealthy mining dynasty that basically set up Eden Falls, the town. She's sent away for 18 years, but she claims that she cannot remember the events of the actual murder. So when she comes out, she comes back to Eden Falls to try and piece together exactly what might have happened that day. So it's my first attempt to write that kind of book. It's been a long old slog. I sold it back of a crisp packet to my publisher like 3 or 4 years ago, and then I had to work on Malabar House novels, and it's taken a long time. So you guys will be the experts in that kind of book, and you'll have to I can sympathize. I can.
Oh, it sounds brilliant.
It sounds great. Yeah.
I look forward to reading it.
I would reserve judgment, ladies, because I know what I'm doing when I'm writing the historical thrillers, and I often periods when I didn't feel that I knew what the hell I was doing. To give you a simple example, I wrote 110,000 words, thought I'd put it to bed, and then 3 months ago I reread it and I said, "Do you know what? Something's missing." And then I thought, "What is it? What is it? Oh, I know. I'll change the tense."
Yes.
So, yeah, change the tense to present tense.
Yeah.
And then I thought, what else? You know what? I'll change it from third person to first person.
Oh, those are big changes, aren't they? They take forever.
Why do you think I want to jump off the top of a building?
Yeah. It's been there. Yeah.
Oh no, it does sound brilliant though. I'm looking forward to that.
It sounds
I
really
do like the title. I do like Eden Falls as a title because it has
I do.
I love the double meaning. Yeah, brilliant. Well, that sounds exciting. I can't wait for that, Vaz. So it's coming up towards the end of the episode now. Now, we usually ask our guests what they've been reading and what they'd like to recommend. But since this is our last episode of the series and the last episode of 2023, we thought that we would ask instead for your top 3 books of the year, if you can manage to narrow it down for us, please. And I'm gonna ask Leslie and Nikki as well, but we have already agreed that we won't recommend each other's books.
Okay, fair enough. So I have got a few reads, 2 crime and one non-crime, and I'm going to apologize first to say, there's far more than these 3 books that I read during the year that I thought were brilliant and wonderful reads. And some were written by friends, some were not. So please don't come around and punch me in the face because I didn't mention your book. So the first book is not crime. It's called Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. And I know Bonnie Garmus doesn't need any more publicity. But you asked me, to be honest, about the best books of the year. And this was just a wonderful book. It's set in the 60s, I think, about a female scientist. And because I've worked at UCL, a university here, for 17 odd years, there was so much of what she described. I mean, not that I'm saying that my colleagues are sexists, but so much of the university environment that she described that I really loved. And the book has, of course, sold millions, and it's big TV series with Brie Larson now. So yeah, she doesn't need any more sales, but it's just a fabulous book. The second one is called Black Liver. Black Liver sounds like a Christmas dish, doesn't it? Black River by Nilanjana Roy. And that is an Indian crime novel, and it starts with the murder of a young girl in an Indian village, and then it explores the various actors in and around that village investigating this crime, and it touches upon themes that are very prevalent in modern India, which is sort of caste prejudice, Hindu Muslim rivalry and prejudice that's crept in over the last few years. So I personally, of course, because I write about India, but also because I think it was a very well-written book, really quite enjoyed it. And the last one is, again, somebody who doesn't really need the publicity, but it is one of the best books that I read during the year, and that's The Secret Hours by Mick Herron.
Oh yes.
And that's another one of the Slough Horses novels. And each of these books it just gets better and better, and it's because Mick is not just a fabulous writer, but also because the world that he's created is something that I found very inspiring. I mean, the Malabar House novels were compared because of the setup.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Very similar.
Yeah, compared by the Times to these books, but Mick's are qualitatively different to my books because they're contemporary and they're in the spy world. And just the fact that the naughty sense of humor that he puts through these books while dealing with very serious topics, I think that's what sets those books apart for me.
You've stolen one of my best books of the year.
Ooh, what are yours, Leslie?
Well, I was going to say The Secret Hours as well. I've got a few more, but yeah, I absolutely love. I love Mick Herron's writing, and I love that whole structure of the book and the monochrome inquiry and everything about it. I just thought it was brilliant. But I would say, okay, so I'm going to find another 3 if I can't say Secret Hours again. I will say one of the books I really found unputdownable this year was Shari Le Pena's Everyone Here Is Lying. I think it's her best book yet, actually. And I mean, all her books have been huge successes, but that one, I just could not put it down. I really devoured it. About a girl that goes missing and the father that's possibly, you know, suspected of being involved in her disappearance. I could not guess it. You know, a lot of novels, you kind of have an inkling as to what's going on. I could not call that one at all, and I just had to read. It was the definition of a page turner, and she does that sort of small community in America so well, doesn't she? And all the different characters. Just followed all their stories, loved it. The other one I really loved this year was Yellowface by Rebecca Kuang. I mean, that was the sort of a literary phenomenon this year, wasn't it? Thought it was really well written, fascinating subject, obviously, you know, cultural appropriation we were talking about earlier, and the publishing industry, plagiarism. It certainly sort of dished up some home truths, I think, about the publishing industry and how books are marketed. But I really enjoyed that one. And I also really loved The People Watcher by Sam Lloyd. Now, we had Sam Lloyd on the show, didn't we? I've always loved his books, from the very first one, The Memory Wood. He has this knack of writing really individual, idiosyncratic main characters. And in The People Watcher, it's a woman called Mercy Lake who only goes out at night because she's sort of allergic to the daylight. She can't go out in the daylight, and she's watching and helping members of the community, doing random acts of kindness for people. But of course, she's being watched at the same time, and gets involved in something quite interesting. I can't say too much more without giving it away, but I'd highly recommend Sam Lloyd's books to everybody, particularly The People Watcher.
What about you, Nikki?
Yes, I'd echo Leslie's. Actually, I love The People Watcher as well. I thought that was, he does write amazing characters. I think my three of the ones that I've liked best, I would say All of Us Are Broken by Fiona Cummings. I absolutely love her characters in this particular series that she's created. A kind of a detective, Saul Anguish, which is such a brilliant name in itself. But he's quite a very interesting character. And when we talk about kind of not making your characters two-dimensional, he's certainly got a lot to him. And I found it's definitely kind of a difficult read, I would say, in that it kind of tackles themes that are kind of disturbing, I guess, but I absolutely adored it. I think she dealt with it really well, and it made me cry at the end as well, which it kind of takes quite a lot to make me cry. So I thought that was fantastic. I also loved The Trap by Catherine Ryan Howard, because it was one of, as you say, Leslie, it's one of those times where you can't see what's coming, and she had plotted that so brilliantly with that twist that just completely floored me. I thought that was fantastic. Normally, as you say, you can kind of sometimes see where books are going, or it's not too much of a surprise, but that was just, it was like somebody had punched me in the face. It was just, I thought it was fantastic. And I also loved In Memoriam, which isn't I guess a typical crime novel. It's set in the First World War, and it's a love story between two kind of very young soldiers who go off to fight. And I think it's got kind of debut of the year and Waterstone's novel of the year. And again, she probably doesn't need any more publicity for it. But it was I didn't think I'd like it either. It was one of those books that I picked up and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to like this, but I absolutely loved it. Completely engrossed. Characters were fantastic, and absolute heartbreakingly brilliant. So I would recommend that one as well. How about you, Lauren?
Well, I'm very impressed, guys, that you've stuck with 3. So well done.
It is hard. There are a lot more than 3. Yes,
it is really hard. So I would like to say ones I've really enjoyed this year. So that You Can Run by Trevor Wood, which I just absolutely devoured. I loved the characters and the plot and the pacing, which is absolutely brilliant, that story. Her Last Summer by Emily Freud, which isn't out till next year, but I read this year and it's just sprang straight to mind. It's a documentary around a missing person, so it was right up my street, and I absolutely loved it. It went to Thailand. It was brilliant, and there was a bit in there that I properly screamed at, which isn't easy to do, I think. And then I also had The Killer's Christmas List by Chris Frost, who we all know as Chris MacDonald. Really enjoyed it. I just love his writing and I love the characters that he creates. So that was a really good one. So they are my top three. I won't mention the other two that I had written down because no one else has done three. More than three.
I'm reading The Killer's Christmas List as we speak. I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, are you?
Yes, I've read that as well. It's a great read, isn't it? I'm really pleased that that's proving so popular with readers. So yeah, Chris is a great writer. Well, sadly, Vaz, that's all we've got time for. I mean, a huge thank you to you for coming on the show today and sharing some of your wisdom and wit and humour. And just, yeah, we could listen to you all day. I could probably listen to you all week, actually. You're fascinating. You're going to go away with a very big head, but it's all deserved. So Death of a Lesser God, people, is already out in hardback and ebook and will be coming out in paperback in March next year. So ideal as a Christmas present, get it ordered now. It really is brilliant. We all loved it and we all love you. Yeah, that's it. That's it from me. So much.
All of the love, and I'm now going to go down and tell my wife everything that's been said here today. Get it on record. Because it's been a long time since she told me that I was wise or witty. So
she'll be able to listen to it all over again, Baz, if she really.
I'm putting it on loop.
Play it over Christmas, yes. So that's it for 2023 from all of us on In Suspense. Leslie and I will be back in February 2024 with our next series, and we'd like to thank all of our listeners and viewers for all your support this year. If you've enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a review, and keep an eye on our socials and we shall tell you what's going on.
Yes, so that leaves me with the final task of saying goodbye from Baz. Goodbye.
Bye, guys.
Goodbye from Nikki.
Bye.
Goodbye from Leslie.
Goodbye.
And a very last goodbye from me. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye. And Merry Christmas, everybody. Merry Christmas.